you to the Waterloo Public Library for embracing and supporting the One Sky Overall Community Speaker Series. Renison University College, affiliated with the University of Waterloo, was established in 1959. Students of Renison earn University of Waterloo degrees. Our original founders established as the college's motto the Latin phrase, sed coelum solum, one sky over all. This phrase has evolved over the years to encompass all that we do. Renison believes deeply in contributing to a world in which social justice, diversity, and equity are not aspirations but realities. Our programs reflect this view. We believe that barriers exist where ignorance and misunderstanding prevails. We aim to collapse those barriers through programs that improve our understanding of diverse languages and cultures, social and economic environments, and questions related to gender, spirituality, and a shared sense of belonging. Renison offers undergraduate degree programs in social development studies, honors arts, and honors arts and business. Our postgraduate programs include a Bachelor of Social Work and a Master of Social Work with a focus on health. Renison offers classes for undergraduate students who choose to minor in applied language studies, East Asian studies, or studies in Islamic and Arab cultures. We also have courses that count towards a major or minor in religious studies. Renison also has a wide selection of community and professional education programs so you can experience culture, engage in language learning, or explore spirituality through a dynamic selection of events, workshops, courses, and programs at your own pace. Thank you for your interest in this series. Today's event is the last of the 2020 year, and it promises to be interesting and highly relevant in today's environment. I wish to thank this exceptional group of panelists and moderator for taking on this topic tonight and giving so generously of their time. I will now pass it over to Julie Friesen from the Community Justice Initiatives to get things started and help moderate our discussions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Court. Thank you, Nancy from the Waterloo Public Library, and welcome to everyone joining us. I see the attendees' names here on my computer, and I recognize a few, so hello to you, those I know, and to those I don't know. Welcome to Taming Toxic Trolls, Finding Peace Online. So we thank you for choosing to spend your evening with us. And we hope that you find our conversation tonight interesting and informative. So I would first like to begin with a land acknowledgement, and I guess I invite us all just to breathe and be present as I do the land acknowledgement. So as we pause together to make a land acknowledgement together, let's remember to hold respect and gratitude toward the land itself. When the land, water, and animals are not well, then that means we as humans are not well. I hold immense gratitude and respect for the Indigenous nations who steward these lands. They've kept a sacred covenant of responsibility for generations. Where I live, in Waterloo region, these nations are the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral Peoples. The 6 nations include the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and the Tuscarora. I am non-Indigenous, and I am a treaty person. My right to be on this land is governed by the Haldeman Tract Treaty, and I acknowledge and remember that the First Nations did not cede land or relinquish sovereignty or their relationship to the land, but rather agreed to share resources and maintain peace on a shared land base as outlined in the Dish with One Spoon Covenant. I commit to continue learning about my responsibilities to the land and to the First Nations on whose lands I live. I continue to try to live in a way that seeks to hold me and the governments accountable to the treaties and the wampum agreements and the calls to action generated by such reports as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report, and the UN Convention on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So thanks for sharing that acknowledgement with me. As I told you before, my name is Julie Friesen, and my pronouns are she and her. And I'll be moderating tonight. I live in Waterloo region in Ontario. I did get an email from someone who's going to be joining us from another country, so that was pretty exciting. But I work for a local organization called Community Justice Initiatives, and we're a not-for-profit charitable organization. And so one of the areas in which the organization that I work for is really interested in is creating opportunities for people to build relationships. I'm really interested in those spaces where we can intentionally create positive relationships with each other. And we're also really interested in helping folks find ways to find agreements with each other when there's harm or disagreements or conflict that they are living with. So I personally can't wait to hear tonight from the panelists that we have, so that my understanding is increased around online presence and how we can all help to build online peace. So I want to welcome our three panelists, and basically I'm going to not do one of my tasks, which is introducing people. I'm going to make them introduce themselves. So I'd like to invite Aimée first. Aimée, would you be willing to introduce yourself to us?
Hello, I'm Aimée Morrison. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English Language and Literature on the main campus of the University of Waterloo. I am noted for having a lot of opinions and for expressing them online. I teach in the areas of social media as a form of online autobiography where people craft textual and multimedia versions of themselves to achieve their social goals in the world, such as they can find it online.
Thanks, Aimée. Christina, would you like to go next?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Julie. I'm Christina Parker, and I'm an assistant professor at Social Development Studies at Renison University College in Waterloo. My research focuses on peace-building education in K-12 settings, so I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight, and yeah, thank you all.
And last but not least, Brad.
Hi there, yeah. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me in here. I was looking forward to this discussion. So I'm currently working at University of Ontario Tech University as the coordinator of the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism, where we look at a number of issues. We do in research, community outreach, as much as we can with the situation we're in right now. But also, I work along with an organization called Life After Hate and the Organization for Prevention of Violence, where I particularly work on helping individuals that have found themselves involved in violent extremist groups leave these types of groups. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, because I think I could probably go on for forever, as we all probably could, about the different interesting things we're all working on. But I'm looking forward to engaging in some important dialogue tonight. So yeah.
Great, thanks. So basically, sort of how we've thought about starting the conversation off is starting with a few questions that each panelist will give some thought to. And then if another panelist wants to sort of jump in after and we can start a conversation, that's great too. I'm really okay with whatever we want to do. But the first question is, what comes to mind when you hear the title of our time together, Taming Toxic Trolls, Finding Peace Online? So for example, what's a toxic troll? What do you mean by online? Or whatever that sort of brings up for you. So Brad, I'll start with you since you're on my screen first.
Okay, yeah. I mean, like a lot of things that we look at, there's always definitional debates about what these things might be or might not be. So I think I can talk specifically about the area that I guess that I look at, which is often online actors or surrounding violent extremism or racism, things like this. I think there might be an overlap with the you know, wider spread definition of this, but I think that people go online in order to, as one of the other presenters tonight was talking about, is creating this image of themselves to try to project sort of their opinions and this type of thing. So they want to go and they want to disrupt things by, you know, inserting some sort of contentious, you know, comments into conversations to either make them go a certain way, try to, you know, make a conversation go the way that they want to see it go, and often to create division. And that's where sort of in my offline study of violent radicalization and this kind of thing, like we look at those things as they want to divide society, both online and offline. So that's what the intentions are of a lot of these people who are trying to do this kind of thing. I mean, I also think that they come along to, you know, promote certain mindsets and certain ideology too. So I think there's a lot of, there's ideological structures that come into why these trolls might be acting in certain ways. Now, of course, this is all dependent on what platforms we're talking about. I mean, outside of my platforms, you know, I hear even from my own children where these, you know, kids talk about trolls in their video games, and it's very widespread, and it can be, you know, this behavior adapted into a lot of different areas. So yeah, I mean, I guess I can leave it at that, and leave it to some of the other participants to answer here too.
Great, thanks a lot, Brad. Aimée, would you join next? What do you think of what are toxic trolls to you and sort of the area of your expertise and online? What all can that be?
I think there's a lot of keywords in here, right? So first, if we try to tame anything, we're going to be in trouble as individuals because the only person's behavior that we can control is our own, right? So the toxicity that we're talking about, I think most people can conjure an image in their minds when we think about online toxicity, and it can be anything from just making a space unpleasant, right? The way people were Zoom bombing for a while, right? They'd find an open call and then come in and just yell obscenities at people and then leave. I mean, that's a kind of toxicity. Another more structural kind of toxicity is trying to systematically disrupt things like political conversations or debates by sort of debasing or degrading the level of discourse in order to sow conflict where none exists. And then there's emotional toxicity, where people may get too wrapped up in some kinds of communities or modes of self-expression or community expression that lead to a lot of anxiety, right? So those are the different kinds of toxicity. And there's different kinds of trolls too. I mean, Whitney Phillips's work in her book called like, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, right, is about trolling culture, which is really for the lulz, as they say, right, which is disruption for the sake of sowing chaos, right? Sort of like internet trickster figures that are just trying to ruin other people's day with no agenda beyond that, right? But that idea of what a troll is has kind of expanded also to name malevolent actors who do have a specific political or social agenda in their disruptions, right? And if we are to find peace online, in some ways that will have to, for many of us, come less from individual acts of taming other people's toxicities and a little bit more sort of care and attention in the curation of the types of online gatherings we wish to create around ourselves, and maybe also pushing for stronger regulatory structures that will address kind of the larger platform level issues or sort of hate speech or threatening action or harassment laws that we already have, right? So I wouldn't want to lay at the feet of individuals what are properly structural level problems with online discourse.
Thanks, Aimée. Christina, are you able to go next?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Julie. It's really interesting, and you know, I appreciate Court for putting this panel together. And I think the title he chose is intentionally provocative, and it really draws attention to the fact that there are, you know, there's a serious issue with trolls online and people who engage in toxic, hateful, and discriminatory behavior, and that happens obviously both in person and online. But these trolls, when they are online, they could easily hide and, you know, sitting there behind their screens, masked identifiers, and anonymously provoke. And you know, when people are anonymous, it might be easier for them to spew hate because they're not accountable to it. So, you know, in my work, I focus on in-person interpersonal conflicts, primarily between students and teachers. And I think to address the problem of toxic trolls, we really need a two-part strategy. So, you know, thinking first, prevention. We know that conflicts online have gotten out of control and we need to find a way to prevent them. And, you know, when we're thinking about resolution, secondly, resolution in a world, you know, where we clearly are all interconnected through social media, trolling will obviously happen, it's unavoidable. We can, however, think about how to create more productive dialogue, and I really look forward to sharing some ideas I have around that today.
Great. Well, it's really interesting, the kind of different perspectives that all of the panelists have. So this is really going to be interesting. Did any of you have questions for each other about your first question? You don't have to, but I just want to do a little invite here. All right, well, we will move on. Our questions kind of go in a bit of a order, and we'll see where we head. So as human beings, we would not be using social media and other online platforms if they didn't fulfill some sort of need for us. So what needs do you think we are seeking to be met by being online with each other? So take that in any direction that you want to. And Christina, I'll have you go first if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure, Julie. Yeah, thanks for asking about people's needs. You know, Julie, as someone like yourself who is so well versed in conflict resolution theory, I think you'll appreciate that when people's needs aren't met, conflict escalates. And the ways in which people are engaging online is a reflection of what people are craving. And I think that's connection. And today, you know, if I have a view that I want affirmed, I could find people and groups online that will affirm it. And that affirmation will make me feel included. And that's what connection delivers. It delivers inclusion, you know, even if it means excluding other people. So I just finished teaching a course actually on political ideologies with a fantastic colleague, Dr. Jason Blockhouse. And it was amazing to see first-year university students grappling with their political ideologies. You know, they're bouncing among what they learned at home, what they're seeing online, what their friends are saying, and then what their professors are saying when they come to university. So what really gives birth to ideologies, as we've seen this year, is crisis. And, you know, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, COVID's disproportionate impact on communities of color, climate crises, protests in the streets, you know, all of these events just of 2020 alone really have people latching on to different ideologies and digging into them in different ways. So, you know, although I find trolls as frustrating as the next person, you have to acknowledge that deep down, they're really just angry and they're crying out to be heard. Usually not in the most thoughtful or civil way, but they're crying out to be heard. So it's not so much about the perspective they're pushing as it is about being connected to the people, that acknowledge them and that agree with them. So it really is a catch-22 in some ways, because without these online communities, they go on feeling unheard and conflict escalates. But then with these online communities, they get egged on and their views dig deeper and conflict escalates. And this is why I feel that the solution lies in equipping people with the tools through what I describe in my work as dialogic pedagogies from a very young age. And it's about finding people who disagree with you and finding ways to engage in civil dialogue. So it's not about being isolated, and it's certainly not about finding people online that will egg you on, no matter how extreme or exclusionary your view is.
Yeah, Aimée.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of come at that same question that Christina did, but from the other side. And I would say the online social platforms, because they're not subject to gatekeeping in the way that other media are, have attracted emergent communities of marginalized people whose voices have been actively suppressed, right, from public speech. So we know a lot more about Me Too right? We know about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We know about disability activism communities. We know about racial justice activism communities. And these are communities that the social needs that they are having met is to be able to understand themselves as a public, with a public sphere in which they can speak as individuals within a community, right? And so in the sort of mainstream media age, where we do not have these platforms where anyone can, start a blog, say, well, look, there's me. I have a Twitter account. I'm just a regular schmuck. I have 6,500 followers on my Twitter, right? There's no way in the pre-social media age that I could reach that many people with my thoughts about breakfast, right? Or my thoughts about autism activism, right? And so the existence of these communities seems to look like it has created fractures in a kind of social conformity about what is normal and who is normal and what the common set of values are. But it turns out that a lot of people's voices were just suppressed, right? And that now that they have an opportunity to speak in public and they have the opportunity to be witnessed by others who may not be in those communities, sometimes that assertion of identities that were formerly marginalized draws out a kind of defensive reaction from others, right? So I would say not all online conflict is created equal. Sometimes the conflict is created by people who finally have a platform from which to speak, and sometimes conflict is created by those who have always had a platform and do not wish to cede it, right? So there are some people who maybe in working on their online behavior need to branch out and look for people who disagree with them, but there are other people online who their whole lives it's been nothing but people disagreeing with them, and they go online to find people who agree with them. I'm thinking specifically of the hashtag actually autistic community, right? Like if you want to see a lot of conflict, you would want to see grown-up autistic people being attacked by autism parents, right? Who disagree with the way that they're sort of producing their own life narratives, right? And it'd be hard to say, well, you need to listen to different perspectives, autistic people, because no one's ever listened to them about anything before, right? So it just depends, I think.
Great, thanks, Aimée. Brad.
So yeah, I think where I'm going to come at this one from is like this idea of the sort of isolated person, and people have sort of touched on it a little bit, but it's like this idea that the lonely person who's sitting there seeking belonging. We're all looking for an identity in our lives. We're all looking for somewhere to, particularly now too, in pandemic time. A lot of the people that I deal with in my work and that other colleagues of mine deal with are, either family members or they are people who have found themselves isolated and then said they found an identity online with some sort of political movement of some sort, and then have found a collective identity with these people online where they never really had to fit in somewhere before, and have found a meaning for their lives in whatever these echo chambers are that they've decided to get themselves involved in. And I think to scale back to the beginning of where this person is, sitting there looking for identity or belonging in their lives. I mean, that's why a lot of people join lots of different types of social movements, positive and negative. So focusing on the negative end happens to be, at least in my line of work, is definitely what we do. We look at a lot of the why people join this stuff and then negatively get involved in things that are not pro-social and things that are end up destroying their lives, and they become parts of these racist groups or violent extremist groups. But I mean, that's the real extreme end. I'm only at the very beginning of this. We're talking about, often it's some of the people that we are helping are 12, 13 years old. They're just, they don't realize that they were just looking for some video game community to be a part of, and then they ended up getting involved in something that they didn't even know. And it's like the way back, and then online is also used for the way back. So most of the work that we do is also, again, online. It's based out of online. So, I mean, it's, and then creating a positive identity for a person. And there's all sorts of things that are going on online that are identity seeking behavior, and it's, what do we do with Twitter? What do we do with Instagram? I think we can like often we can separate these things, but then the whole thing becomes the identity of that one person, right? Their whole space that they're using their social media for, and what they're, you know, all of their activities. So we'd have to know more. It's very challenging. But I think on the onset, it's like we're all seeking something. I know when I tell my daughter's friends, who's 11, that I have a Facebook account, they kind of look at me like, what? Hello. You know, what world are you from, right? But I find Facebook is quite helpful for somebody at my stage in life, where I'm just looking to connect with my friends from high school or whatever. But like, it's kind of, that's the identity. The reason why I have it is for a different reason than someone else, and so on and so forth. So I mean, I think it's really, really interesting why it is that people decide to engage online in certain ways, and the needs-based awareness of why do we need these things. I mean, I at some points look at myself, if I didn't have this, what would happen? Where would I be at if I didn't have all this Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all this, and I went back to 2002 or whenever it was? I don't know where I'd be at. So yeah, yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that's useful to ask, and I think it's also valid to answer, of like, I think we need to know when we've had enough of social media too, and make sure we take those breaks. So yeah, those are some thoughts from my end on that.
Any follow-up questions from any of our panelists to anyone? Okay. I forgot to remind you, audience out there, that we will be having some questions, and then we will probably have some time to take some of your questions as well. So if you do find yourself having a question, if you would put it into the question and answer part, and we may not be able to get to all of the questions, but we may get to yours. So try it out. So our next question is, and I think we've already had some insight into how you might want to answer this, but how do we tame toxic trolls? So what are some strategies or thoughts that you have to share with us? So Aimée, I'm going to start with you first.
Well, that's good. I have lots of ideas about this. In my own work, I study social justice movements online, and I'm part of disability activist communities and, you know, progressive political sites, and I run a feminist blog, so I have all kinds of opportunities to engage with people who do not want to hear what I have to say. One thing is that on the spaces that I control, like my blog and my Facebook, for example, like Facebook follows have to be mutual. I just don't accept people, right, that I don't know. That saves me a lot of nonsense. If there are people who are engaging in fights in and around my timeline on my Facebook, I just mute them for a while. I don't have to engage. When people are being provocative, I don't have to engage. On a space that I control, like my blog, I can have a clear commenting policy that says you can disagree, but you can't call people names, right? And, you know, hate speech is not tolerated, and sort of biased, bigoted speech is also not tolerated. If you don't like it, go comment on somebody else's blog. It's perfectly okay for us to have these boundaries. And I'm always like really surprised at how surprised people are when I say stuff like, you don't have to post that comment on your blog. You don't have to allow anonymous comment, because we're all sort of wrapped up in this idea of like free speech on the internet, right? But free speech that imperils other people's capacity to participate, right, is not really free speech. Some types of speech suppress other types of speech, right? And so you can just lurk places. You can make your Twitter account private. You can unfollow people who cause trouble, right? It's okay. I know it's difficult to understand in like this sort of modern media age that we could just say, I don't want to listen to those people, right, who cause nothing but drama in my life. Or just because somebody wrote something stupid on the internet, I don't have to correct them, right? Or just because somebody quote tweeted me in a mean way, I don't have to engage it, right? So walking away is always a strategy. You know what they say, like, don't feed the trolls. don't give it oxygen, don't give attention to people who are looking for it. And if it's really difficult, if something bad is happening in your social media and people are being really mean to you, one thing I recommend often is to give your account to a trusted friend who can delete and block and manage all of that for you, so that you don't sort of become emotionally contaminated by other people's poor behavior. So I guess largely I'm promoting like curation and boundaries and walking away. That will solve, those are the problems that you can solve, right? You can try to report people to Twitter or to Instagram or to Facebook, but like it's very rarely successful, and they'll be back in 20 minutes anyways, right? So the only thing you can really control is your own behavior and your own timeline, and you are allowed to take a breath and make some choices about what you want.
Those sound like wise words. So, Christina, would you like to give some thoughts next to strategies or thoughts that you have around taming?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I appreciated what you were just saying, Aimée, about, thinking about setting boundaries and, using silence as your power in many ways and as the only strategy you have. But, when thinking about taming toxic trolls, I think that there, are two ways we can really think about it. First, by responding to trolls potentially with questions, and second, through an all-hands community approach. So we know trolls will trigger us, and instead of trying to shut a troll down, which I would consider a fear-based response, we can pose a question, which I would consider a curiosity-based response. So by asking questions, even though it feels like you're creating a platform for them to spew hate, you could potentially create space for dialogue. That's one potential strategy, but the second is an all-hands community approach. So in the case of young people, and Brett, it's really interesting to hear that you're working with people who are as young as 11 or 12, and I'd love to hear more about that, what you're doing and how you're approaching such very young people. But it's not really only teachers, it's also community service professionals such as social workers and child and youth workers in schools that need to make sure that their strategies are not top down when working with young people. And I feel that we really need to adopt a more restorative approach to our interactions with young people. And research does tell us that when young people feel as though they have strong adult allies and connections, they are much more likely to feel included and safe. So I think restorative justice is a critical response to addressing toxic behavior in both in-person and online interactions. And with successful implementation, restorative circles, for instance, could reduce instances of conflicts and violence, racism, and potentially redirecting young people who might be subject to radicalization. And one approach that could work online is to engage in what is known as a microcircle. In a microcircle, it's a method where the two fighting parties talk to each other, and then and there immediately about what has happened, about their needs, and come up with suggestions about how to go on. But still, in these kinds of dialogic exchanges, power dynamics are present, and they continue to play out, and often in destructive ways. So we also need to figure out how to identify creative ways to name such dynamics, and consciously working towards creating norms for engagement and empowerment. And that's really fundamental to any restorative approach.
Thanks, Christina. Brad, do you have some thoughts to share?
Yeah, this is probably one of the things that I get asked about the most, about what do we do about the stuff that's happening online in the sense of trolls in my space. But I think it's there's no golden ticket to this. There's no like premium answer that I'm going to give that's going to work across the board. Just like when someone says, how do we prevent radicalization, or how do we prevent youth from getting involved in drug use or crime or whatever, like there's no answer for that. There are things that we can do for sure, and there are ways that we can respond when these things do happen. And I think it's it really is not about a top-down approach. I think I agree with that statement very much. I think it's we know what's going on in a lot of our communities, in physicality in the actual community, and we also know what's going on in a lot of our online communities too. So I think what Aimée was saying too about you are the beholder of your social media, you are the beholder of these accounts. I've had times where I'm so frustrated I shut it down. That's it. for a bit. Like I'm just not going to go there. And it's very helpful to like, just get rid of, like, just say, you know what, I've had enough of that. Because, you know, a lot of the work that we're doing is we're under, like, I've worked with tons of social media companies, and they talk about, well, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole with these violent extremists and these racists and these people that come back, and they're, you know, over and over again, and of course then they're getting like vilified for allowing these people onto their platforms. But really, how can you really control? A person can have as many different profile as they want. Like, I mean, it's and across all these different platforms. So like, how do we really like tame these people per se? I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is us building awareness in our different spaces to provide more safer spaces than there are, you know, these negative spaces for people to. But of course, I mean, you know, you talk about Facebook. It's one of the places that's been really in the media as of late about all the, you know, the different stuff that's making its way on there. I mean, yeah, it really is just about muting them. It's about individual action here and saying, hey, like, let's not even give these guys a moment. And then, yeah, if you want to think a little bigger, yes, policymakers need to jump in on this too, and do what they need to do from their level. But I mean, from the micro level, I think from the community level, we can be doing the majority of the work, and then policymakers can sort of follow what we, you know, what seems to be working up there. Again, but there's no golden ticket. I mean, I've been involved in research that's about content moderation, regulation, you know, all this kind of stuff. I don't think there's one answer. I think it's probably a collective effort. But at the end of the day, I think we just need to be better as a broader community in general, knowing that the internet is a transnational phenomenon that we can't really control. So we just have to accept some of this stuff and try to build the safest spots for ourselves and our youth to operate in, right? So, yeah.
Aimée.
Yeah, I think I want to come a little bit back to something Christina said and something that Brad said as well. And, you know, Christina was talking about asking questions and being curious. And I think that's a great strategy. And in fact, you know, I tend to pronounce things, right? I'm like, oh, I believe this, oh, I believe that. And like, sometimes people will be like, well, I don't know about that. And I'm like, "Arr!" But then I think like, oh, that's not what I meant. Like, I'm wondering why you're having this reaction to the thing that I said. And I've had a couple of experiences this year where that's happened to me, and I've taken a breath and I thought, I don't know this person. This person seems real upset about something I was trying to say that was nice. So I'm just going to ask. And that's turned out pretty well for me, actually, that it takes some deep breathing and some sort of ego control, right? And some kind of generosity to the perspective of other people. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I have such a high degree of literacy now in the platforms that I engage in, is that I can tell the humans apart from the bots, right? So there are some conversations, it's never going to be worth entering, right? And if you are fluent enough in how Facebook works, if you are fluent enough in how your Instagram works, if you've ever read a YouTube comment, right? Like, you know how to pick your battles. Some new followers, you just block them right away. You just block them so they never have a chance to look at your stuff, right? You begin to learn, right? So I think platform literacy is actually really an essential tool for taming toxic trolls, because, you know, if we want to drive cars, we have graduated licensing in Ontario, right? Like, you have to pass a written test about the rules of the road, and then you, like, in a graduated way, get more and more freedom to participate in the open road. But we'll just let anybody's, like, grandpa on the internet and anybody's 11-year-old on the internet, and they get embroiled in things that they don't understand, the consequences of which they don't understand, don't have the capacity to really engage with. And the longer I spend on the internet, and the more I'm able to be like, I think I'm going to ask this person a question from a place of care and curiosity, but these 10 new followers, I'm just going to block because I know they're not real people. Or this is a troll account that we know, and there's a block list, we can block all of them, right? So I think a kind of platform literacy, as well as a kind of social and conflict literacy, is really important, because it can be really hard to know even just what you're dealing with when someone drops a comment on some of your things. Really hard.
Aimée, that's a really great segue, because I actually had a question from the audience as a follow-up to some of the things that you were just talking about. And the audience member talked about, if you're representing an organization, is it still appropriate to ignore or block trolls? What sort of strategies would you have for organizations?
If you're an organization, if somebody, like, let's be real, walks in the front door of your building and poops on the reception desk, you call security and you have them removed. It is okay to require a certain amount of civility before you will engage with someone, right? If somebody is swearing, if somebody is trash talking your brand, you do not have to engage with them, especially if they're not a customer or a client, right? You can block, you can protect your other, interacting agents from this kind of toxicity. If people are treating you and your organization or your brand identity or your corporate identity online in a way that it would be unacceptable for them to treat you in an office setting or a booth at a trade show setting, you can turf them. Just because somebody's talking to you does not mean you have to answer them. I'm a woman, I know, right? I practice this all the time, just not responding to stuff that's not going to lead you anywhere, right? I don't know why. It's very sad that everybody thinks like, oh, we got a comment on our thing and we have to respond to it, or we have to leave it up there because free speech. But no, I do not think that you do. That's my very strong opinion about that.
Any other thoughts from Brad or Christina about that question? Brad?
I think I 100% agree with what Amy's saying. Is like, if you're an organization and you're being targeted by any form of abuse, that does not need to be tolerated whatsoever. Like, it just is not and that's what's so funny about some of the social media companies, when they're getting often, they get criticized for removing like some person from their site. So, I mean, if they think that they don't want that person on their site, I don't know, that's their business. I'm not here to say I'm the voice of Twitter or I'm the voice of Facebook. If they've said something that goes against Facebook's policy, well, okay, it's against Facebook. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's not a policy that I like, but I mean, it's their business. It's their thing that they're doing, right? So the free speech thing as well. I mean, we could probably get into a huge debate about that one, but like, when you're talking about specific organizations, I don't think, especially when it's online, it's like, there's no need to have negative discussions especially when it's often these trolls are coming along and just trying to, take the spotlight off of the important discussions that you've planned to have with other people who are interested in. So, you know what? Let's move them out and continue our conversation. Like, the organization does not have to deal with these external, people who are trying to intervene in their discussions or their work that they're doing. So, I mean, we're faced with it all the time, and I wish there was just a simple ignore button, but you have to like go delete everything, and often there's like little side conversations about each bad thing or bad person that comes along, which stinks. So I think we could do some more about how our reaction should be. Just like, there should be maybe some more tech that we could use to just get rid of these things quicker, so we don't have to think so much about them and get back to the good work that we're all trying to do, right? So anyway.
Anyone else want to comment of the panelists? Okay, so there is another question as well. That's a real follow-up question. And now I've had a couple of people ask it on the question and answer, which is, how can you look for, what are some of the things to look for between what's a bot, what are the bots and what are real people? Like, are there little things that you need to know? Are there places maybe people could go to find some resources on this? What thoughts do we have? Aimée.
Right. So on Instagram, I get new follow requests every day, and the new follow request, somehow Instagram thinks it knows who I am or something, but it's a lot of smiling middle-aged white men in military uniforms often, and the username is like some string of characters followed by a series of numbers, right? Like, they sort of follow a pattern, like it's been generated by a computer. And if you go, like, and I take the time, I have a lot of followers on all my socials, and every time I get a new follower, I click over to the profile. Who is, like, joined the account yesterday, is already following 700 people. All of them are feminists. Block, right? Has not had any tweets. block is actually a porn bot. Block, right? So you have to go look. If people are going to start to follow you, that's somebody you've let into the cocktail party that you're hosting in your socials. Go over and have a look. And if the account is, I always look for mutuals, right, is followed by so many other people that you also follow, that's a little less dodgy for me, particularly in social media that require reciprocal follows. Definitely, I do Google image searches on profile pictures because most of these profile pictures are in fact stolen off other accounts, right? So I do my due diligence here. So that's a little bit of platform literacy, is to recognize the patterns of fake accounts, which is like some combination, first name, last name, and then a string of 7 numbers. Profile pictures that are sort of like blandly central casting, sort of anodyne. I'm a woman who, Instagram, the platform, thinks it knows something about me, so it sends me a bunch of like middle-aged dudes in military uniforms, or with dogs, or wearing sunglasses on boats. Like, all these men want to follow me. I don't think they're men. Like, I don't think they're people, right? And on Twitter, it's a lot of, I tweet about social justice issues. So this draws to me right-wing trolls sometimes. And there comes to be a pattern, a lot of anime photos in their profile pictures. And if you click over to their timeline, you can see them brigading and attacking other people. Like, I want no part of this. I'm just going to block this person. Now they can't even see my tweets, let alone follow me. So you have to sort of take the time when a new interaction happens on your site. If somebody is going to like leave a comment for me, we're like, well, that's easy for you to say because you're a rich white lady. I'll be like, who the hell is this person? And I don't guess. I click over to their profile and I try to figure out who they are. Is this a good faith attempt to engage me in conversation? Is this a real person? Do they just start fights with other people? It slows me down too, right? And so if you're going to spend time on these platforms and potentially gather a big audience of strangers, it's really worth your time on a sort of daily level. Every new follow, go check it out. Every new commenter, check out their bio. It's worth it. It will produce less conditions for toxicity and more conditions for actual community, so that you will prevent the nonsense before it blows up in your face.
Thanks, Aimée. Any other thoughts, Brad or Christina?
I guess I can add something quick on that, is that I think the aim for this thing, for these platforms, is often good dialogue. I know in my space, we're looking to have tough conversations for sure. So what Aimée brought up about, like, yeah, I want to see if this is genuinely someone who has some sort of grievance with what I'm doing. Fine, we will talk about it. Let's still have that conversation. But that's the idea of like the media literacy in general. Like, people, I think, just don't know enough. Like the countless amount of family members that I have that have, messaged me and said, how do I use the Instagram? And I'm like, if you're calling it the Instagram, probably don't have the Instagram. Just move back to flip phone or whatever you were doing before. Like, it's I think that's the awareness that we should have, is that, we want to have these tough conversations, especially now where, a lot of us are feeling isolated. The last thing we want is a whole bunch of isolated people with really awful things on their mind. So we want to be able to, get these things out if we can. And how we do that, we want to have people that are, willing and able to talk about these things online and in such a way that is, constructive as well, right? So anyway, yeah. So
I like, sort of how about preparing ourselves, right? Like doing some due diligence. And so I guess I'm going to ask another question, and for all of us, I'm just going to be skipping back and forth and jumping around. So, one of the questions that we had thought about were, what can we do to actually prepare people to better engage online, and even specifically sort of young people around this. So it sounds like people were sort of jumping into these ways of engaging with each other without maybe necessarily preparing people for that. So Christina, I wonder if you'd comment a bit on that question.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about how we could prepare young people to engage peacefully online. And I think first of all, we need to look at proactive measures, and my work with young people has shown, varying ways that we can have the kind of productive dialogue that we're hoping for, and that could happen online. And most notably in classroom settings, it's about helping young people have constructive arguments in class, or what we can call conflict or peace building dialogue. And as they practice these kinds of skills in what we can call a presumably safe setting, they might be able to better enable their communication and capacity for dialogue in their lives and interactions beyond the classroom. And second, I think we need to look at reactive measures. So there are many different ways in which people react and respond to conflict. And our response is ultimately shapes the subsequent interactions, as we know, through the conflict cycle. And in instances when we know who's trolling, it's easy enough, at least in school context with young people in person, to use a variation of restorative practices to address it by bringing the parties together to talk about what happened. But in online context, it's really different. And how teachers might define conflict for young people is really different from how young people see it. So, at one school where I conducted research, the teachers brought the entire cohort of intermediate students together and for what they thought was a carefully planned restorative process to address what they considered to be cyberbullying. And the kids, however, completely laughed it off. They didn't engage. They refused to acknowledge that a conflict even occurred. And to them, it wasn't a conflict, and it wasn't that they didn't do anything wrong. So the ways in which young people experience conflict themselves ultimately shapes their interpretation of the world and the ways in which we're choosing to hold people accountable to. It's very, very subjective. So, yeah.
Aimée or Brad, like, are we preparing people well in this new age to engage?
I have a 14-year-old, a girl, and we have always operated under the sort of rubric of, socializing is socializing, and you need to be parented in all the spaces in which you will eventually come to act independently, right? And so she had a sort of graduated entry into online spaces, and I don't say, you have to give me your password so I can look at your stuff and like do random audits of you. I don't. I ask her, I'm like, can you come and show me, right? Who have you been talking to? What have you been doing? Even before she had access to devices or social media, when she was about 8 or so, and she'd have this like, old iPhone she was using for an iPod, and she would take pictures of people. I'd say, you never take pictures of people without their consent, right? And you don't take a picture of somebody to be funny, right? Because often what you think is funny is hurtful to somebody else, right? So even before she had the capacity to post these images anywhere, was always talking about, like, did you take that picture to make your friend feel good, right? Or did you take that picture to laugh at your friend, right? And about how those hurts can be transmitted, or what it means to share something with an audience, what it means to sort of gain meaningful consent from people to tell their stories in online spaces, or how you want to interact with people, or whether you are letting, Instagram algorithm control you, or whether you are using Instagram as a tool for sharing your drawings with your friends, right? So it's this constant sort of parental involvement, doing the work that parents are supposed to do, which isn't like, this is how you use this filter to make your nose look smaller. Like, it's not about that kind of literacy. It's about, how do you engage people online, right? How do you decide who you're going to add? How do you decide how you're going to speak to them? How do you decide who you're going to tag, or how many comments you're going to leave, and why? So it's about values, and it's about instilling those values and practices in your own children. Like, and you don't have to be a technical genius to do this at all. You just have to be implicated in the social spaces that your children are in.
Thanks, Aimée. Brad, Christina, anything else around this? Brad?
I have a quick comment. I think, yeah, basically everything Aimée said, but also from just the perspective of parenting, I think that's a really important point that we need to really key into these days, is that social media is a part of parenting now. Like, this digital area is a part of parenting, so we need to educate ourselves as well, not just say, oh, well, our kids are going to school, they'll somehow learn it. I mean, that should be fine. I mean, but like, it seems like such an easy concept. However, a lot of the parents that I talk to are like, I just don't know what they're looking at. they have Parlor. I'm like, excuse me, like what? Like, okay, what else do they have? And then all of a sudden you find out all these other fun things that the kids are looking at, and the parents have just given them all these devices to go look at, you know, iPads, tablets, you know, cell phones, all this kind of stuff. And this is on us to know what those things can do. Like, you know, what are we doing in that space? Like, how much do we know about what our kids are doing? Like, I mean, for me, one of the biggest challenges has been Roblox, but I'm a hard no on it. But some other parents are 100%. They think it's a fine game or whatever. Of course, there's a lot of different things that would have to be in place. But there's different things that parents, we just don't. If I don't know enough about the platform, I'm not going to let my kid go to it. I'm just not. I got to go learn first, and then we can work on that gradual. I love that gradual entry for kids into this social sphere. What is the online sphere in general? I mean, kids just talking to other kids on PlayStation 4 is scary enough for me as a parent. Forget about all these other weird, you know, platforms that are sort of coming up over and over again. One will get shut, and then there'll be another one to replace it. We know that, right? So it's an ongoing thing. So I think that's on us. The onus is on us to build up more awareness for those who are going to be community leaders, parents, educators, all that. We need to know about these things before the kids do. So I know that's tough, but it's something we can strive for.
I don't know if you all can see the Q&A. I think you can, but there's some questions around sort of using like there's power imbalances on social media platforms. There's influencers, there's social privilege, and that follows you to social online platforms. I don't know if you can take a look at the Q&A. There's like 3 questions or so that sort of all have those sort of connections. So Aimée, I think you have some thoughts. You're muted now, Aimée, by the way.
Social media changes a lot depending how many followers you have. Like, it really does. Like, I am making jokes on my Twitter now that every time I complain about something online, corporate gets in touch with me. Like, I don't know how many of you are using like D2L for your online teaching right now, but I am a noted complainer about D2L online because I hate it. And I had a meeting with the vice president for development about it, right? Like, so yeah, bigger accounts do tend to draw more attention to their complaints, right? There are power asymmetries online. I would never quote tweet somebody I disagree with. I wouldn't like quote tweet where I'm like basically taking a picture of their tweet, sharing it with my followers. They'll have like 200 followers and I'll have 6,500 followers and I'll be like, what an idiot, right? That's an abuse of my power because I'm exposing this one person who has less of a platform than me to my entire platform with this like, you're an idiot above it, right? If somebody with 200 followers does that to me, it's still rude, but it's not a major crisis, right? So not everybody online is equal in that space, in the amount of attention that they draw, in their capacity to generate mob responses to other people, in their ability to draw the attention of customer service lines or like to get their GoFundMe like fully funded and stuff. So definitely we have this idea that everybody online is one individual person and we're all roughly equal to one another, pulling ourselves up by our digital bootstraps and everybody has equal access, right? But it's like in Animal Farm, like some animals are more equal than others, right? So we all have one individual account, but the accounts that can draw more attention and more people and more response are able to have a disproportionate impact in the world. And if you are that uphill skier, right, with a higher number of followers or a more established account, it really behooves you to think about who you're going to pick fights with online. It's okay to punch up, as they say, right? But you shouldn't punch down. And that's, just as true in stand-up comedy as it is in online spaces too. So always be mindful of those power differentials and how they really enact differences in how people interact with one another.
Thanks, Aimée. Any other thoughts, Brad or Christina, if you had a chance to look at some of the questions and answers there?
I think I agree with the idea of knowing sort of your placement online, is particularly people who are leaders in the online space. When you look at in Twitter, recently I noticed there's a guy who, he's very well known, he's a famous person, but either way, I notice the outreach that he's doing is really, really positive. Like he'll really like, you know, post something of a person who would never get a chance to be there in like with his following, you know, to have that big of a voice. And I think that's really admirable of a person like that. That's like looking at, you know, specific social issues and things like that. Somebody coming forward and trying to get the voices of the less than unheard people out there. And I think that's a positive use. And also there's a person in the United States who we all know about, but we're not going to talk about by name, I guess, or at least I don't anymore. This person always attacks almost all the smaller people beneath. And that to me is just that is the ultimate example of problematic behavior online, right? And that's what, you know, it's tough to understand why that type of behavior continually happens. However, you know, I'm sure there's some psychologists out there that might be able to assist with those types of things, but it's, you know, attacking the vulnerable, all those types of things. I mean, these things exist online too, like so much so, and particularly in a lot of the stuff that we're working on around youth online is like, that's a big complaint, is that they felt bullied or trolled or whatever themselves, and that's why they become then involved in negative behavior online too, which is like, you know, not necessarily their fault, but that's why, you know, we want to understand where our places are online, and definitely, yeah, what Aimée was saying about how, you know, if you're a much more followed person like that, you don't understand the reach that gets. If you have 4,000 followers, it's all of their accounts now on Twitter that it blows up. So it can either go with like a 1 like or a no likes, or it can like explode. And that phenomenon is, yeah, I mean, it can be super helpful for certain things, and then it can destroy somebody too, right? So we need to be very mindful of what our placement is in the online environment as well. So yeah.
Christina.
Yeah, just to weigh in on this conversation, I just feel that, you know, as a female professor of color, I'm often the one who might be expected to respond to incidents of race and racism, you know, whether that be implicitly or explicitly. And really the hardest things to see and engage with are the white liberal arguments that perpetuate further racism and inequality. And oftentimes it is really a challenge to respond, and the emotional energy that goes into it is draining and leads to holding internalized oppression for many people. And I think it's really why we need our white allies to step in here. And the reality is that white people could tolerate toxic trolling in ways that people of color can't and shouldn't have to. And that's why we need more white people to engage in sharing and standing up with the kinds of radical perspectives that need to put out there to acknowledge white complicity in perpetuating inequality. So just wanted to sort of add that in there.
Great.
Just to kind of add on that point, I think
Yeah.
I think Christina makes an excellent point. And one thing that white allies tend to do sometimes, which is not helpful, is tag the targeted person in their response to the troll, right? So let's imagine that someone is hassling Christina online, you know, about one of her identity categories. And I'm like, that's not right. I need to step up and get in there because this doesn't attack me personally. So I have the emotional fortitude to do it. I'm not going to tag Christina in my response to show her what a good job I am doing of protecting her, because now I'm just perpetuating her participation in this conversation that might be difficult to her, right? And so a lot of people online express that as well. Like, if you want to jump in there and have those battles so that I don't have to, fantastic, please don't tag me, right? Leave me out of that conversation. So that's something that that if people in more privileged identity categories want to support the advancement of justice and clean up some of the discourse there, go gather your own sheep, right? Get in there and deal with your uncle's racist Facebook post, right? Don't go looking for some big public famous controversy online and tag the famous people in it. They don't need your help and they don't want the extra attention, right? So start a little closer to home when your energy permits it.
Great. So that's, now that we're getting personal with family, let's go to our next question, which is, it's always an invitation whether you respond or not. But here's our next question for the panelists. How do we know that we are not the trolls? Have you ever acted out in anger online? And how do you control these impulses in moments of disagreement? And we want to go first, so allow, this time you can make the choice.
Sure, I guess I'll make a quick comment on that. I'm never showing anyone my Twitter drafts ever. Yeah, that's where we, I guess, where you're thinking of answering something that you really, really like, but I should not answer. This is not something I should answer. Learning that impulse and learning to control that especially in places where we know. We're working for different organizations, or we're representing a group of people who feel a certain way about something. And if we say something, there has to be, I admittedly, as a person, when I first became aware of social media, I mean, we're just like anybody. We put every picture up. We're like, okay, should I put this picture of me and my kids? Should I put this picture of me and this person who works in this area of government? Probably not. But at first you just throw everything up there because you don't really know what's going on. But nowadays there's definitely, I mean, again, I think it loops back to one of our conversations that we were having earlier about knowledge about what are we talking about, right? The different things that we're bringing out there, and I just, sometimes you don't need to answer. You don't need to be there and partaking and engaging the trolls, and then almost becoming one in that yourself in that space. And that's especially when people have technical or experiential expertise on something, and then it's again, attacking somebody who maybe have less knowledge about something, and they may be a troll, true, but is it really necessary to be by the way, I published 7 books on that? You published that, just, move on. That person obviously doesn't have knowledge who they've attacked. And what does it matter really? I mean, unless you can send them some words of encouragement to read some certain thing that pertains to that. But anyway, it's a very challenging thing. And I think we have to manage our impulses. And even though there are some things, particularly over the last year, that it's almost like you've had this perfect tweet, all put together, that you're going to unload out there. And then you're like, no, not this one. This is too good. Right. So it's I mean, I don't know. I think it's there should be some sort of rules of engagement in some ways or another that we sort of follow in particular situations. So, yeah.
I think what I'm trying to learn the difference between is emotional anger, right, and righteous anger, right? So I can be angry about structural injustice. I can be, angry about a political decision, and I can express that anger online because I am angry about an idea, right, or a fact. Emotional anger is when somebody says something that hurts my fifis, right? Or when I am reacting with kind of an adrenaline response, like a fight or flight or freeze response. And I don't tend to go to tend and befriend. I tend to go with verbal repartee that devastates everyone around me. But that's me acting out of anger, which is a secondary emotion. So probably I'm afraid of something, or I'm insecure about something, or I am sad about something, or I feel trapped about something, right? So learning to distinguish, I can be really mad that, Jeffrey Toobin exposes himself on a Zoom call, and now his firing has been reported in the New York Times, and there's a lot of people who are I think he's a pretty great guy. I can say, well, we're really willing to make apologies for these sorts of people, and I will write an angry tweet about that, but I'm angry about an idea, right? I'm not, calling Malcolm Gladwell names, right? I may disagree with the thing that he said, but I'm not attacking him personally. I'm not aiming to wound, right? And in the moment, both kinds of anger can feel very similar. I think it takes like a good deal of maturity, like Brad says, leave it in draft. Don't maybe send that tweet. Get up, have a Christmas cookie, sit back down again, ask yourself, like, what are my motivations actually for sending this? Am I soothing a hurt that I am feeling, or do I think I'm adding something to a discussion that needs to be said?
And just to add to that, I agree that responding peacefully isn't easy, and it's sometimes requires many different drafts or silence, and asking questions there's only so much one can do or can have the emotional energy to do. And something that is very apparent is that the more secure and attached we are to particular identities, some of which we have the privilege of choosing and others we don't, the more we might engage in aligning with a particular perspective. But yeah, I think that definitely shapes the ways in which we can and do engage.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay. So there's another question, which is someone who's talking about how do you think we will look back on this introductory period of social media and alternative facts? And will we maybe identify it as a critical point of change in human history akin to the Industrial Revolution? So what do you think about looking far ahead to look back? Any thoughts around that?
I guess this is one of those things where it's like somebody has done something stupid on the internet and I'm going to get a call from a reporter. And the answer I give every single time is the same. Human behavior and human motivations, right, have not changed. Human drives have not changed. The means by which we can act on those drives has changed, right? So the opportunity cost, right? You're not going to be Martin Luther, getting your, your theses printed and nailed on the doors of the churches, right? Like you actually have to pay to get that printed. You gotta like walk around and your feet are gonna be sore and you're nailing stuff to church doors and you're like trying to get out there. Like anybody can send a tweet now, right? So the opportunity cost of some kinds of public speech are much lower, right? And that means much more speech is happening. But the animating drives that make people behave in the ways that they do are the same that we've always had. Like, we have suddenly not transformed into a species that does not care about being loved, that does not find some satisfaction in being part of an in-group that necessitates that there is an out-group. We're not going to stop enjoying food or enjoying sex. Like these are basic human drives, right? What changes are the opportunity costs and the opportunities for us to act on those drives in ways that are modulated and moderated, right, by the social structures that allow us to behave in these ways with or without positive or negative consequences or not. So eventually, like most people, get it under control when the social costs of what used to be bad behavior, but for some reason is suddenly possible online and unsanctioned. That only goes on for so long before people start connecting your real name back to it. And then if you're like trolling 13-year-old girls online, you're going to get fired from your data analyst job, right? Like there comes a time when the new technology is brought back into the folds of like community standards. I mean, there's a reason that social media platforms call their rules community standards, right? Like we could talk about whose community they're talking about, but that's what it is. People are going to people, right? And they're going to people more or less aggressively in one direction or another based on the tools that are available to them.
Brad or Christina, any thoughts around your particular area of expertise around this?
I think looking forward, yeah, like there's just like we've come this far with all these different platforms and we've built all these platforms, we also have to be able to build into, hey, maybe we were wrong for doing like this. Let's like take this part out of the platform. This stinks. Like, let's not do this. Like, let's not let ISIS have place on our platform, or let's not let the KKK have a platform, you know, on our, these are things that, I mean, things can change, regulations can change, like these types of things. We've got to open our minds to, like, okay, like Aimée was saying, like we've got to this point where we've opened this up in this online environment. Like, what are we going to do about our failings too, though? Like, what are we have to work on our self-criticism of like where we went wrong on this, and we need to be really working together to move forward, because it is a real community. It really is a virtual real community out there, and some people live in it. I mean, in my area, I talk about this all the time, is like, you know, we have reports of people spending anywhere from like 1 hour up to 12 hours a day on YouTube alone, just looking at videos. And it's like, that's not healthy for one, but like, you know, why though? Like, why are we, you know, why have we created this for them in that sense, right? So, and especially when you talk about different types of content that are available, should this content be available? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the way we deal with certain things needs to change, I think. I mean, and the way we deal with racism online isn't the same way that we deal with it when it goes in different ways in the real community, right? Like, it just isn't, it almost like, it's almost mind-blowing when we hear some of the things that go on online, and that like some of these, you know, platforms are just continue to allow those types of things that go on. And we sit there and go, yeah, but, and it's like, well, you know, I can stick up for the companies, like I've said, but you can also say, like, there has to be a limitation here too. Like, there has to be some sort of, and this is sort of my endpoint in standardization. There has to be some sort of standardization that goes on to make this a safe environment for people to engage in. And I think that's, again, I don't have the golden ticket to this, but I think it's something that we can easily work on it and at least make it look like we're making a better effort than we are for those who work in this area right now. So yeah, those are some of my things. I mean, for long game, I'm always a hopeful person, so I'm hopeful that we can achieve some of these things and make it safe for the next generation of people that want to come through. And I'm sure we're going to see lots of new and interesting and amazing things happen particularly in the tech space. So yeah.
Christina.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're just saying, Brad, and, you know, just thinking back to young people, I think one place to take up these issues at school is through the media literacy curriculum, the strand that's embedded in the language arts curriculum, and it was introduced in 2006. And, you know, some teachers know how to engage in this curriculum really well, and it's a way that schools hold themselves accountable for remedying this issue. And however, for a lot of students, the media literacy is really another example of a broken curriculum, where in too often there are teachers from a very different generation teaching a very new generation about how to manage their online presence and how to evaluate media. And I think, you know, we need to trust the new generation, that the new generation of learners has the great potential to be politically and socially engaged, and schooling could be part of that journey. It needs to be part of that journey, you know. And I think back to in 2009, during the Sri Lankan Civil War, it was young people across the diaspora in Toronto that were organizing protests, and in some cases organizing counter protests. And at one of my research sites in a grade 7 classroom, I saw some of these students making connections to, you know, what they were learning through engaging in mobilizing those efforts, and then in their history curriculum, relating it to what they were learning about the rebellions of 1837, and connecting it to the conflict in Sri Lanka. You know, some of them articulating that modern day political leaders reflected what they saw as what they were learning about as the family compact, and, you know, people who were holding power and refusing to intervene. And so, you know, I just think that, yeah, there's space in which we can do this. And yeah, it's about creating that space for that learning to happen.
Right, any other thoughts? All right, we're almost running out of time. So I think what we'll do is sort of end on this particular question for each of you that I'll invite you to respond to. And then I think someone probably pops in from either WPL or Renison to say some last words. So, so I guess, I don't know if this is really a call to action, but I wondered if we could sort of end with either, you know, what are some of the things you would like us to remember? I often think, like, if I'm gonna, you know, do a lecture or a talk to somebody, I always think, I read somewhere that we only remember 2 things from like an hour-long presentation as an audience member. So, you know, what is a potential call to action? How can we all help to build online peace? Or what are some 2 things that you think that we should remember from this topic as we leave each other? I don't know. Is it, who wants to go first?
I'll take Mike Caulfield's ideas. He wrote the Web Literacy Handbook for Student Fact Checkers, and one of the first actions that you're meant to undertake when you're doing fact checking online is to check your own emotions. So I think that's always a really, really good place to start. You know, as my therapist says, feelings are information, not instructions, right? So to sort of take a moment and find your own center and your own peace, examine your own emotional reactions. Am I engaging with this piece of content because I'm really enjoying being livid and angry right now? Am I trying to stoke that fire of my own rage, right? So check your own emotions. And then the second piece of advice would be, it's okay to have boundaries, right? Engage with what you want to engage with, block who you need to block, right? Mute who you need to mute, and decide what the rules of engagement are that feel most safe for you. And it's okay to hold to those.
Thanks, Aimée.
I guess I can revert back to 2017, which seems like ages ago, where I was at a presentation when we were allowed to go out in the world, and there was a RCMP officer there who was talking about digital citizenship and how we have to just be the same thoughtful individuals and inclusive individuals that we are in real life as we are online. Like, why do we act differently online? Why do we go to an online space and then all of a sudden decide that it's okay to use certain terminology there that you would never even think twice about using in person? Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of research on that. That's fine. But I mean, I really do think it's something that we can teach just as a basic principle in parenting, as in education. I think it's a wider thing that digital citizenship should be just as important as our offline. And that's, you know, that's one little area that I think that came to mind there. And also, I think in moving forward, I think that we spend a lot of time talking about what's horrible about online. We also need to talk about what might be good too. So, for example, Google has a whole youth digital literacy program that's available. I think it was 2019 that came out. Like, I mean, as much as we want to say Google's doing horrible and they're doing this XYZ, what about the things that they've created in good spirit, with good intention, and with trying to educate young people about what they do? Like, what do these platforms really do? Yeah, we know it as a search place, but like, they do a lot more than that. There's a lot more out there within the, you know, alphabet companies that they're actually doing, right? So what is it? How much do people really know about Facebook or Google or YouTube or these different platforms? So should we teach about that more? Should we teach about these things more to younger people? I think so. And I think then I guess my point about digital citizenship comes from that. If we've learned about these things and we know what these things are and how, you know, we should potentially act or do things like we've been talking about through this conversation well on these platforms, I think we're in a better place. Maybe there's less of these trolls around in that sense.
Christina.
And just to add to that, you know, I think in hearing everybody's perspectives and thinking about this issue, you know, the reality is that, you know, people are going to cross the line in person and online. And as a society, we need to figure out how to engage more peacefully and how to engage more restoratively. And do we want to teach young people how to engage peacefully online? Of course, but do we also want to teach them how to stand up and intervene when they see hate and prejudice? And I think also, of course, and obviously, when we don't know the parties involved, as is the case with most online trolling incidents, it's more complex. But, you know, I think, you know, maybe there's a space for an online platform where people can invite each other to engage in a space, to have something akin to digital circles, and, you know, meeting someone where you say to the person, you know, I've been aggrieved and I'd like to talk to you. And, you know, there are some ways that we can bring conflict resolution and peace building theory to online spaces to enable restorative justice, and potentially with AI technology, there might be some platform that could guide people through a dispute. So that's sort of, you know, one question to think about today is whether there's a model in which we could have that, and what would it look like?
So I'm sorry, folks out there, that we didn't get to every question, and there were some great ones still left. So thanks again for engaging with us today. So I want to thank the Waterloo Public Library and Renison University College for being part of this lecture series. I also want to thank our presenters, Aimée, Brad, and Christina. Thanks for giving your evening to us. But most of all, I'd like to thank you, our audience, for choosing to spend some of your time with us. And we appreciate your thoughtful, interesting questions. And we hope that you found today interesting, engaging, and you learned a little bit, and this sort of sparks your motivation to go and find out more about how we can all contribute to a peace, whether that be offline or online. So thanks again, and I'm not sure, I think someone else may be coming on now.
Hi, everybody. Oh, I'm just going to spotlight myself here. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I hope you've learned a lot. I've learned a lot myself. I just want to thank Julie and our panelists, Aimée, Christina, and Brad. And thank you, Renison, for this partnership. This has been really well received. I just wanted to let everyone know that if you go to wpl.ca, so that's Waterloo Public Library website, you'll be able to find more lectures just like this, and some that are coming up into the new year. But thank you, everybody, and have a good night. Bye. Thanks, everyone.